Sup, ladies and gentlemen, Acklon here. Of course, welcome back to each and every one of you. We've been very negative for the last few weeks here on World of Warcraft, and I don't think that's been particularly surprising to anyone. Dragonflight didn't quite end the way that we had hoped. You know, it wasn't quite the crescendo that I think most of us were excited for. And in many ways, I could literally spend the next 20 minutes, probably 4 or 5 videos still, trying to explain how I think it could have been better. But that's now water under the bridge. It doesn't matter anymore. Now we look forward. And this video is titled Why I'm Excited, and I am actually very, very excited for World of Warcraft. Now, I could talk about 10.2.5 and the really cool things that's coming in 10.2.5. The follower dungeons, which I think is going to be really awesome. There's some mention of some vampire survivor kind of mode coming to World of Warcraft, which is another super exciting thing for me. But that's not why I'm excited. The gameplay in World of Warcraft has always been good, right? It's been lackluster at times, and there's been sort of a stagnation in Dragonflight, specifically with how world quests operate and the things we do in world quests. But overall, I don't think people ever really complained about the core gameplay of World of Warcraft. That has always been very solid. The complaints have always sort of, been between some of their sort of temporary systems or borrowed power systems, and then story, which has become a very big sticking point in this expansion. And of course, for me, the story is the ultimate thing that I care about in the game. I don't care so much about the gameplay or anything else. So why am I excited for this story? Well, in order to understand why the World Soul Saga is so exciting for me, and of course, the World Soul Saga is the War Within, Midnight, and the Last Titan, we have to go back to the beginning of World of Warcraft. We have to go back to Vanilla, TBC, and Wrath. Arguably the 3 best expansions or best additions to the game ever. I mean, Wrath of the Lich King was when peaks were hit. It's when World of Warcraft was considered to be the juggernaut of all MMOs out there. And over the course of many years, there's been times where WoW has sort of shined a little bit, and there's been flickers of that former glory, but it's never fully been captured again. I don't think that there has ever been an expansion that has been so holistically positively perceived and received by the player base as those first 3 editions of the game. Now, you could argue and say, well, Mist of Pandaria was actually really fun, but I think you are neglecting the start of Mist of Pandaria, which was really not that fun. World of Dailycraft, a lot of people quit, a lot of people were quite unhappy, and yes, it did have a phenomenal end, but there were rocky moments in between that. And then you had Waters of Draenor, which was an entire mess. You had Legion, that was actually a very good expansion, but again, it had some bad parts to it. And then you had BFA, that was an entire mess. Then you had Shadowlands, that was completely not even in the same ballpark. They weren't playing on the same field, if you will. That was 2 hookers over. And then you had Dragonflight, which, isn't as big of a mess as Shadowlands. It's not as big of a hit as Legion. It's just sort of okay. It sort of exists in that framework. And why is that the case? Well, if we go back to the core of World of Warcraft, Vanilla, TBC, and Wrath, those were the last 3 expansions in World of Warcraft that were, well, the first, but also the last, that were very much based on a blueprint. When Vanilla came out, TBC was always going to happen. When Vanilla came out, Wrath of the Lich King was always going to happen. That is why in Vanilla already, you see discussions and hints of the demons. You already see the Forsaken and the Scourge that will eventually become Arthas and Northrend. Right, you're already seeing those stories implemented, because all the way back then, they already knew that if the story was going to go forward, if this was going to be a success and people were actually going to play it, these will be the next stories that we tell. Now we know that I believe TBC was actually meant to be originally just a patch. Um, we know that the Emerald Dream was supposed to be a patch as well there, but so I'm not arguing that things weren't cut and that they didn't make snapshot decisions over one thing or the other. But in the end, they had a plan and they knew where they wanted to go with this story. That's been lost in World of Warcraft for a very long time. It sort of World of Warcraft became, and many of you thinking back on the story will immediately know what I'm talking about. It became this sort of what's cool right now, and let's do that. And if the thing that we're going to do now that is really cool is going to screw us down the line, yeah, we'll deal with it down the line. But this is something that we can do that is really cool right now. And I always think about the burning of Torresil. Such an emotional and major moment in World of Warcraft that had every player going, "Oh, what? What's going on here?" And then it became clear as the story progressed. Blizzard felt like they were very disappointed in that action. It's sort of that meme of I'm being let down by my own bad choices. That's sort of what happened there. As Blizzard started realizing, wait, this can only really end one way. And then they had to make massive concessions and pivots in order to not have it end that way, because clearly they weren't ready to say goodbye to Sylvanas as a character. So, and World of Warcraft has been plagued with this sort of storytelling for a while now, where, every patch is a new chance to get a major rise out of the player base. And it has to be taken because you don't know when you're going to get another shot. The World Soul Saga seeks to change that. We are going back to the origins of World of Warcraft in many ways. We're going back to vanilla TBC and Wrath. In the War Within, the Midnight and the Last Titan is already there. It's already written. It's already planned. They already know where that story is going. So why is that a good thing? Well, for one, it really sorts out a lot of the pacing problems that World of Warcraft has been dealing with. And many of you will know the endless discussions that we've had on pacing problems, where consistently we have this issue within World of Warcraft where stories feel rushed. They don't feel like they're complete. And when they do finally reach their logical end, it's very unsatisfying because most of the story was just not paid attention to. If you have 3 expansions to tell your stories, suddenly you're not as rushed because you can plan out these stories to play out in the way that would make the most sense for the stories rather than be constricted to the timeline of the stories, which I think, and this is just me guessing because obviously I don't know. I'm not in the writer's room, but I do sometimes feel like the writers have these really cool ideas of stories that they want to tell. And then they're informed, but okay, this story needs to happen next patch because we can't spend more time than that on the Blue Dragonflight. And it's like, yeah, but wait, we can't really do the Blue Dragonflight story in just one patch. Well, make it work because we're not going to do Blue Dragonflight this patch and the next patch and the patch after that because we have next patch, we have the Bronze Dragonflight and then we also have the Black Dragonflight. We can't do all 3. So you have to do everything in this one patch. And now suddenly you're sort of forced to cut content, right? You have to remove this and just sort of stitch it together to make sure that it makes some kind of logical sense. It's not a good way of telling stories. And my hope is that with 3 expansions, you're no longer in that corner. You do now have the freedom to say, well, we're going to introduce a lot of these stories early on. And then we're just sort of slowly going to let these stories play themselves out. And we'll follow them to their logical conclusions. The other thing I really like about the 3 expansion saga is for the first time ever, Blizzard have the ability to incorporate major losses into the story that previously would have been unheard of. You can't really do major losses if you don't know what the next story is going to be, because those major losses could bite you in the ass, right? And since World of Warcraft is this sort of superhero tale where in the end the heroes have to win, you are consistently running into a problem of well, if we let them lose now, how do we know we're going to be able to save it next one? Whereas now, because you have this entire run up to stories, Midnight, for example, I can very easily see Midnight being the result of us taking a massive L in the War Within. Remember, in the War Within, we're already going up against the Nerubians and we're going up against Xal'atath. But the fact that the second expansion here is called Midnight suggests that we lose against Xal'atath. Like, she actually manages to bring about this new Black Empire of hers. And that's where the Midnight thing comes from. And it just allows you to do that because you ultimately know where it will end. So you can write the peaks and the valleys and the losses and the hero's journey because you know it's only going to end in 4 years from now, right? Or 3 years from now. I don't have to rush the story. I don't have to chase the victories because I don't have the time to write the defeats. And defeats are oftentimes much harder to write than victories because you have to keep in mind how you're eventually going to swing this into a victory. So that's another reason why I'm super excited for the next 3 expansions. As you can tell, there's not a lot of gameplay discussion here because, as I said in the beginning, this isn't about gameplay for me. It's about story. And it has nothing to do with Chris Metzen. I think Chris Metzen being back and him being sort of the mastermind of these next 3 expansions is obviously a very good thing. But I think even without Chris Metzen there is only a way that this can be better with more foresight and with more planning. It can only be better. It can't be worse. Right? Unless somehow they manage to really downgrade. But you can't conceivably think rationally it can really be worse. So yeah, I'm super excited. Anyways, I'm not gonna keep wasting your time on this. I really hope for something incredible, but remember to hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. Subscribe over on Patreon if you want to keep the channel free from sponsorships that want to sell you shit that you do not need. I'm gonna stop wasting your time. Ladies and gentlemen, I am tired as all hell. But it's been my pleasure to entertain you. Peace.